Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Yes, Harry Potter is a great story that gave millions of people magic, wonder, and faith in friendship. But it would be a mistake to think that Harry himself always acted flawlessly. The main character made plenty of mistakes, most often because of his stubbornness, distrust, or desire to act on his own. Sometimes all he needed to do was tell the adults or his friends, but instead he chose silence. And that very silence often led to consequences that could have been avoided. Let's break down the most striking examples. Enjoy watching. Number 1. The Dursleys. Let's start with the obvious. Harry's life with the Dursleys was far from normal. Coldness, ridicule, constant feelings of being unwanted, and even plain neglect. This went on for years, and although Dumbledore knew perfectly well that Harry's living conditions weren't ideal, he clearly didn't grasp the true scale. But Harry himself never really complained. He never told McGonagall or other professors about the years of humiliation waiting for him at home. A serious adult conversation with Vernon and Petunia could have changed Harry's life at least a little. Instead, he pretended everything was fine, while everyone around him preferred to look the other way. Number 2. Dobby's attempts to save him. In the second book, Dobby tried 3 times to prevent Harry from returning to Hogwarts. First, during the summer holidays, he directly warned Harry of the danger awaiting him. Then he blocked the entrance to platform 934, forcing Harry and Ron to take the car. A reckless and extremely dangerous decision. Finally, during the Quidditch match against Slytherin, Dobby bewitched a bludger that nearly crippled Harry. In each of these cases, Harry could have gone straight to an adult. For example, Mr. Weasley, after arriving at the Burrow, or at the very least the professors after the incidents at school. But Harry once again chose silence, even as things grew more and more dangerous. Number 3. The mysterious voice. Also in the Chamber of Secrets, Harry began hearing a terrifying whisper within the castle walls. In the magical world, that wasn't just strange, it was threatening. And although Hermione and Ron eventually learned about the voice, Harry wasn't in any rush to tell the adults. His caution is understandable, but in the end that silence led to a string of attacks and terror spreading through the school. Perhaps if he had spoken up earlier, the adults would have realized much sooner what monster was hiding inside the castle. Number 4. Peter Pettigrew on the Marauders map. In the third book, Harry first noticed on the Marauders map the name of a man thought long dead. Peter Pettigrew was wandering the castle, and that clearly couldn't have been a coincidence. Yes, Harry mentioned it to Lupin, but that's where it stopped. The situation called for much stronger action, at the very least reporting to McGonagall or even Dumbledore. Instead, Harry simply kept watching, while Pettigrew continued to hide right under everyone's noses. Number 5. Punishments under Umbridge. One of the gravest examples of his silence happened during Dolores Umbridge's lessons. Harry knew perfectly well that her punishments went far beyond anything acceptable. The quill he was forced to use etched words into his hand, leaving bloody scars. Hermione immediately asked, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" And indeed, McGonagall would never have ignored such abuse. But Harry once again chose to endure it, as if it were his personal problem instead of a crime against a student. Number 6. The Visions. From the very beginning of the 5th book, he was haunted by dreams and visions. He saw events through Voldemort's eyes, felt his emotions, and even witnessed attacks. But he only confessed this openly after Mr. Weasley nearly died. It's understandable that he hesitated. Admitting the enemy had settled inside his head was terrifying. But the sooner he had spoken, the faster he would have received help, and the occlumency lessons with Snape wouldn't have been so rushed and desperate. Number 7. The decision to rescue Sirius. And finally, the most tragic example, the vision of Sirius supposedly captured in the Department of Mysteries. Harry believed it without question, even though there were plenty of signs that it was a trap. Instead of turning to the Order, he chose to act on his own. Even Snape, who was right there, could have passed the warning to the adults. But Harry chose silence and ran headfirst into danger. The result we all know: Sirius died, and it became Harry's greatest personal tragedy. Number 8. The Triwizard Tournament. Harry never put his name in the Goblet of Fire, yet when it came out glowing in blue flames, no one believed him. He was 14, too young by every rule of the tournament, and yet the professors declared he was bound by a magical contract. "But I didn't put my name in," Harry protested, his voice cracking with panic. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 17. Instead of demanding protection, instead of insisting that Dumbledore or McGonagall remove him, Harry accepted his fate. He faced dragons, merpeople, and deadly mazes, each task designed for older, stronger wizards. Every adult in the room knew something was wrong, but Harry never pressed the point. He didn't beg Dumbledore to investigate further, didn't plead with McGonagall to take him out of the danger. He quietly endured, relying on luck and instinct. His survival was nothing short of miraculous. But the truth is simple: if Harry had pushed harder, if he had refused to play their game, someone would have been forced to listen. Instead, his silence let the trap close, and Voldemort was waiting at the end of it. Number 9. Dumbledore's Army. The Room of Requirement became a sanctuary. Harry stood at the front while students raised their wands, waiting for his command. They called themselves Dumbledore's Army, a name chosen in defiance of Umbridge. Working hard is important, but there is something that matters even more: believing in yourself. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 18. Under Harry's lead, they learned the Patronus Charm, shield charms, even disarming spells. It was inspiring, yes, but it was also reckless. These were children preparing for battle without telling the very order created to fight Voldemort. Harry had allies he never turned to. Sirius, restless and eager to help, would have been proud to guide them. Lupin, a former defense teacher, could have offered safer methods. Even Dumbledore, though distant, might have found a way to shield the group from discovery. Instead, Harry kept the secret, teaching in whispers, until betrayal exposed them. The punishment was brutal. Dumbledore was forced out, and Umbridge seized more power. If Harry had shared the truth earlier, the army might have been a force supported by the Order, not a hidden club crushed before it could grow. Number 10. Voldemort's Return. Harry was the only one who had seen it: the graveyard, the cauldron, the bone, the blood, and Voldemort rising again. "He's back. Voldemort is back," Harry told Dumbledore, his voice shaking. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 36. But when Cornelius Fudge arrived, he dismissed the truth as a boy's wild invention. The minister refused to believe without proof, and Harry's words, raw and frightened, were not enough. The return of the Dark Lord was buried under politics and denial. Harry could have fought harder to make them listen. He might have repeated every detail of the resurrection in front of the entire Wizengamot, pressing his case until doubt seemed foolish. He could have begged Dumbledore to place his memory in a pensieve where others could see the graveyard through his own eyes. But instead, Harry stayed quiet, exhausted, ashamed, and too young to imagine that his word might not be enough. His silence allowed Fudge to twist the story, calling him unstable, confused, and unbalanced. The cost of disbelief was heavy. The ministry ignored the threat, the prophet slandered Harry, and for a year Voldemort built his army in the shadows, all because one boy's testimony went unsupported. If Harry had insisted on evidence, if he had demanded the pensieve be used or stood before witnesses, the wizarding world might have prepared earlier. Instead, his truth was swallowed by lies, and the war that followed became far darker than it had to be. Number 11. Snape's Secret. Harry's hatred for Professor Snape was instinctive, sharpened by years of insults and sneers. Yet in his 5th year, Snape became the one person who could shield him from Voldemort's mind. The art was occlumency, a defense against intrusion. "Clear your mind of all emotion," Snape ordered coldly, Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 24. Harry bristled at every word. He resented the lessons, resented the man, and above all, refused to admit how vulnerable he truly was. Each session ended in anger. Harry left Snape's office with his head aching, scar burning, and pride wounded. Instead of seeking help, he told Ron and Hermione almost nothing. He hid the visions and the pain, convinced that Snape wanted him to fail. The walls between them grew higher when what Harry needed was trust. Even a grudging conversation with Dumbledore could have forced a better arrangement. But Harry stayed silent, letting Voldemort's presence grow stronger. The danger of neglect became clear when Harry's visions began to dominate his waking life. He dreamed as Voldemort, felt his emotions, and sometimes acted on them. The more he resisted occlumency, the more open his mind became. When Snape caught Harry prying into the pensive, their fragile lessons ended in fury. Get out, I don't want to see you in this office again." Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 28. Harry's stubborn silence had closed the only door to real protection. The result was disaster. Voldemort lured Harry to the Department of Mysteries with a vision of Sirius in mortal danger. Had Harry built even a thread of trust with Snape, he might have learned to guard his thoughts, or at least shared his fears before rushing in. Instead, his refusal to open up turned occlumency into a lost chance, and in the end, Sirius Black paid the price for secrets Harry should never have kept. Number 12. The Horcrux Mystery. The corridor appeared in Harry's dreams like a shadow he could not escape. He saw the black walls, the polished floor, and at the very end, a door he longed to open. Each night it returned, sharper, more real, as though he were not dreaming at all but being guided. He was walking down a corridor, toward a door at the end of it. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 18. Harry felt the pull, yet he said nothing to Dumbledore. He believed it was another strange side effect of his scar and decided to bear it alone. The visions grew relentless. Harry woke with his heart racing, the echo of the corridor still in his mind. Ron and Hermione noticed his distraction, but Harry brushed it off. He feared what Dumbledore would say, feared being treated as something broken. The silence only deepened his bond with the dream. Each time his hand reached for the silver handle, and each time he woke just before the door opened. He was both afraid and desperate to see what lay beyond. Then the nightmare became a weapon. One night he was not just a boy walking a corridor, but a serpent, fangs bared, striking. He saw Arthur Weasley attacked by the snake Nagini. He was watching from a position close to the floor, and Mr. Weasley was on the ground, his eyes wide with terror. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 21. This time Harry told Dumbledore, and the Order rushed to save Arthur. But the trap had been sprung, and Voldemort had proven how easily he could use Harry's silence as an open door into the Ministry. That same corridor became the path to tragedy. Voldemort lured Harry to the Department of Mysteries with the promise of answers, of rescue, of Sirius in danger. Harry followed the dream into reality, leading his friends straight into battle. The prophecy was revealed, Sirius was gone, and the cost of his silence was measured in grief. If he had told the Order from the beginning, if Dumbledore had known the truth of those dreams, the Dark Lord's plan might never have succeeded. But Harry chose secrecy, and secrecy became Voldemort's greatest ally. Number 13, the dream of the Ministry corridor. The dreams began quietly, like whispers echoing in the back of Harry's mind. A long corridor stretched endlessly before him, polished floors and heavy doors on either side. At the very end, a single door called to him. Each time he dreamed, the pull grew stronger, as though something behind that door demanded his presence. He was walking down a corridor in the Department of Mysteries, toward a door at the end of it. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 18. Instead of confiding in Dumbledore, Harry tried to shrug it off, convinced it was only another trick of his connection with Voldemort. The visions grew sharper, more urgent. Harry could feel the cool handle under his hand, the anticipation in his chest. It wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a lure, yet he stayed silent, even as Hermione and Ron worried about his distracted looks and sudden jolts awake. He carried the secret alone, keeping the corridor hidden in his thoughts. He feared that telling Dumbledore might mean being shut out, or worse, treated as a liability. That fear outweighed reason. Then came the night that changed everything. Harry's dream shifted. He wasn't just walking toward the door. He was inside, watching through the eyes of a snake. He saw Arthur Weasley attacked, blood spilling across the cold floor. He was watching from a position close to the floor, a snake's view. Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 21. Only then, terrified, did he share what he had seen. The Order rushed to save Arthur, but the trap had already been sprung. Voldemort had found a way to use Harry's silence against him. That corridor was no harmless dream. It was Voldemort's bait, designed to drag Harry into the Department of Mysteries. And it worked. By the time Harry realized the danger, Sirius was dead, and the prophecy revealed. If he had told the Order at the very beginning, if Dumbledore had known how often the dreams returned, they might have blocked Voldemort's influence. Instead, Harry's refusal to ask for help gave the Dark Lord the perfect path into his mind. Number 14, The Half-Blood Prince's Book. The old potions textbook Harry found in Half-Blood Prince seemed like a gift from fate. The scribbled notes in the margins were brilliant, shortcuts to perfecting potions, clever tricks, secret improvements. Suddenly Harry was outperforming even Hermione. "He's making it up. He's not even following the instructions," she protested, her voice sharp with frustration. But the results spoke for themselves. The mysterious half-blood prince had turned Harry into Slughorn's star student, and Harry felt invincible with the book at his side. Then came the darker side of the prince's knowledge. Hidden among the helpful notes was a spell Harry didn't understand, Sectum Sempra. Next to it, in sharp ink, were the words, "For enemies." That should have been the warning. Instead of showing it to Dumbledore or even asking Hermione what she thought, Harry kept the book to himself. The temptation to try the spell was too strong, the secrecy too thrilling. He carried it in his bag like a talisman, ignoring the danger that grew heavier with every page. The breaking point came in the bathroom duel with Draco Malfoy. Malfoy had cornered him, their rivalry reaching its boiling point. Without thinking, Harry shouted, "Sectum Sempra!" The effect was immediate and horrifying. Slashes appeared across Malfoy's body, blood spilling everywhere. Malfoy collapsed, gasping and writhing on the floor. It was only the sudden arrival of Severus Snape that saved Draco's life. Harry stood frozen, realizing too late that the spell he had played with was closer to black magic than anything else he had ever cast. That one choice revealed the cost of Harry's silence. A single conversation with Professor McGonagall could have exposed the dangers of the book. Even Dumbledore, who already suspected the importance of the prince, might have steered him away from disaster. Instead, Harry clung to the secret until it nearly destroyed him. The Half-Blood Prince had given him brilliance, but also a brush with tragedy, and Harry learned that not every gift of knowledge is safe to keep hidden. Number 15, Arthur Weasley's Bite. When Harry Potter woke from his terrible vision of a snake striking Arthur Weasley in the Department of Mysteries, he was trembling, drenched in sweat, and consumed by a dread he could hardly name. The dream had not been ordinary, it had been visceral, raw, lived through the eyes of the serpent itself. He had felt the fangs sink into flesh, had tasted the metallic tang of blood, had heard the strangled gasps of Mr. Weasley as if he were both predator and witness. It was the sort of nightmare no 15-year-old could bear in silence, and yet Harry did exactly that, offering only fragments of the truth when faced with the worried questions of his friends. What stands out most from this moment is not merely that Harry told Dumbledore about the attack, but that he deliberately concealed a crucial detail from Ron and Hermione. He did not admit that he had experienced the vision as the snake. He was the snake. He was attacking Arthur Weasley, the narration tells us. And yet he suppressed that part when speaking to his friends. The decision is strange, for this was not simply another frightening dream, but a direct revelation of how Voldemort's mind and his own had become dangerously entangled. Instead of seeking the counsel of those who had proven time and again to be his greatest support, he turned inward, carrying the burden alone. In truth, Harry had plenty of reasons to share the whole story. Hermione Granger had always been the one to dissect magical puzzles, to connect threads that others missed. Ron Weasley, despite his occasional insecurities, had an instinctive loyalty and a clear sense of when danger was real. Together they had navigated countless threats, from the trapdoor guarding the Philosopher's Stone to the secret of Tom Riddle's diary. If Harry had said to them plainly, "I was the snake. I attacked your father," their shock would have been immense, but so too would their determination to find out what it meant. Hermione might have recalled that Voldemort had once placed parts of his soul in objects, hinting at connections deeper than ordinary magic. Ron, fiercely protective of his family, might have demanded Dumbledore's intervention with more urgency. Instead, Harry carried the knowledge in silence, gnawed by fear that he might himself be tainted. Rowling writes that he felt dirty, contaminated, as though he carried some disease. When he reflected on the connection, this sense of contamination was the very reason he hid the truth. To admit to Ron that he had seen Arthur's agony not as an observer, but as the attacker, would have been to risk Ron's horror, Hermione's suspicion, and perhaps their distance. Harry feared rejection. He feared that his friends would look at him not as Harry, but as Voldemort's vessel. This terror outweighed his instinct to confide, and so he buried the detail, allowing it to fester in his mind. Yet this secrecy had consequences. From that point forward, Harry began to doubt himself, to question whether he was becoming a weapon Voldemort could wield. The fear that he might be controlled, that he might turn against those he loved, grew stronger with every silence. He avoided looking Ron in the eye, convinced that Ron would see guilt there. He found it harder to confide even in Hermione, though she alone might have pieced together the truth of what was happening. The friendship that had sustained him through so much began to show cracks, not because his friends withdrew, but because Harry withheld. If he had told them, the course of events might have shifted. Hermione's logical mind would have immediately pressed him to keep Dumbledore informed, not only about the attack, but about the perspective of the dream. She would have seen that it was more than coincidence, that this was the proof of a direct channel between Voldemort and Harry. Ron, shaken by the threat to his father, would still have recognized that Harry's honesty meant he was not willingly complicit. The conversation would have been agonizing, but it would have given Harry the assurance that he was not fighting alone. Instead, he chose silence, and with it came isolation. The irony is that Dumbledore himself, the one adult Harry did confide in, also withheld vital information. He offered no clear explanation, choosing distance over comfort. Harry's isolation was doubled. He could not share fully with his friends, and his mentor refused to meet his eyes. This left him trapped in a cage of his own dread. In moments of doubt, he replayed the attack in his mind, seeing Arthur Weasley collapse again and again. He convinced himself that he had been more predator than dreamer. He felt sure he had done it, the narration suggests, capturing his inner torment. Had he admitted this fear to Ron and Hermione, they could have countered it, reassured him that he was not Voldemort, but Harry denied himself that refuge. The cost of this silence became more evident as the year progressed. Harry's nightmares grew worse. He feared sleep, knowing that through it he might once again slip into Voldemort's mind. The anxiety fed his anger, making him more volatile. He lashed out at Ron and Hermione over trivial matters, snapping at their concern, because to accept their comfort might mean confessing the truth. Every unspoken word widened the gulf between them. His friends were bewildered, wounded, but still loyal. Had they known the real reason for his moods, their loyalty could have taken a sharper form: vigilance against the mental link, insistence on protective measures, and renewed trust that Harry remained himself. Number 16. Creature's Lies. Harry Potter's greatest weakness was never a lack of courage, but a stubborn refusal to reach for the hand that might have steadied him. This truth is nowhere more painfully revealed than in the night he believed Sirius Black was suffering at the hands of Lord Voldemort in the Department of Mysteries. The vision he received through his scar was vivid and cruel. Sirius, writhing in agony, tortured by Voldemort himself. Instead of stopping to confirm whether this nightmare was real, Harry rushed into action, clinging to the one voice that should have raised all his suspicions. Kreacher, the house elf bound to the Black family, assured him that his master was not at home. Those words, casually dropped in a twisted echo of loyalty, lit the fire under Harry's rash determination. The tragedy of that night begins here, in the moment when Harry believed a liar, rather than slowing down to ask for help from those wiser than himself. The foundations of Harry's distrust in Kreacher were long established. From the moment the elf shuffled into Grimmauld Place, muttering curses under his breath about mudbloods and traitors, it was clear he despised the very people who had taken over the house. Sirius loathed him, Hermione pitied him, and Harry dismissed him as irrelevant. Yet when desperation clouded his judgment, he leaned on the words of that same Kreacher. It is a paradox of Harry's story. He was quick to disregard Kreacher when things were calm, yet he seized upon his statement when fear overruled reason. "Sirius is not here," Kreacher said, and Harry did not ask. Again, the boy who demanded evidence from everyone else simply accepted the elf's lie because it fit the panic rising in his chest. The choice to trust Kreacher's words is all the more tragic when we recall the people Harry ignored that very same night. Severus Snape was present at Grimmauld Place when Harry's suspicions surged. In the book, Harry remembers the warning about Snape being Dumbledore's spy within Voldemort's circle, but his resentment toward the man overwhelmed him. In his fury, he spat half-truths in Snape's direction, but withheld the detail that mattered most. Voldemort had Sirius. He spoke in riddles, trying to bypass his hatred, yet he never admitted the full truth. "He's got Padfoot at the place where it's hidden," Harry muttered, but this cryptic warning was not enough to rouse Snape into alarm. Snape did act, of course. He carried the message to Dumbledore, but the words were too vague to be effective in time. Had Harry swallowed his pride and spoken plainly, Sirius's life could have been saved. Equally perplexing is Harry's refusal to turn to another source of confirmation: members of the Order of the Phoenix. At Grimmauld Place there were adults who could have checked instantly on Sirius's whereabouts. Even in the chaos of Hogwarts, Harry had access to communication through the Floo network, through owls, or through Dumbledore's allies. The tragedy lies not in the absence of tools, but in Harry's reluctance to use them. Hermione herself begged him to verify the vision before acting, warning him against walking straight into Voldemort's trap. "What if he's just trying to get you into the Department of Mysteries?" she asked. Harry dismissed her with the same stubborn certainty that had guided so many of his missteps. The boy who had relied on instinct in battle mistook his instincts for proof in matters of strategy. The words of Dumbledore earlier in the series echo painfully here. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." The choice not to ask for help reveals a fatal flaw in Harry's character. He feared vulnerability more than he feared being wrong. By refusing to admit uncertainty, he blinded himself to options that might have saved the person he loved most. If he had approached Snape with clarity, if he had sought out Lupin or Tonks, if he had even pressed Kreacher with more precise questions, The outcome could have been different. Instead, the narrow corridor of panic forced him forward until it was too late to turn back. Creature's deception was not an accident of malice alone, it was the result of years of neglect and cruelty. Sirius treated him as nothing more than a loathsome reminder of his family's dark heritage. The elf resented him for it, yet remained bound by the old black traditions. When Harry asked about Sirius, Creature seized the opportunity to twist the truth with satisfaction. "Master has gone out," he declared, concealing the fact that Sirius had merely gone upstairs. In that moment, Creature gave Voldemort the weapon he needed most, Harry's gullibility. Voldemort had long understood the boy's heart, and through the elf's words, he manipulated it with surgical precision. The cost of this mistake was immeasurable. The Department of Mysteries became a battlefield where children faced Death Eaters, where spells rebounded, and where the prophecy that had been hidden for so long shattered into fragments. Sirius's death came not as a sudden accident, but as the end of a chain of avoidable choices. Bellatrix Lestrange's curse flung him through the veil, but the veil had been waiting ever since Harry chose to trust Creature rather than test his words. In the stillness of that arch, one can hear the silence of all the questions Harry never asked, the pleas for help he never voiced. Number 17, the Slytherin Locket. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, there comes a moment when secrecy becomes not just dangerous, but self-destructive. The locket of Salazar Slytherin, a dark Horcrux, falls into the hands of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Yet instead of reaching out to those older, wiser, and more experienced within the Order of the Phoenix, they choose to shoulder the burden alone. This decision reveals not only their determination but also their vulnerability, for the medallion was no ordinary trinket. It carried within it a piece of Voldemort's fractured soul, a constant whisper of malice that dug into their fears and insecurities. And while the trio's courage was undeniable, the refusal to ask for help sealed their isolation, leading to arguments, betrayals, and scars that might have been avoided had Harry confided in others. The power of the locket was not a mystery to the reader, nor to the trio themselves after only a few days of wearing it. Every moment it clung to someone's chest, it corroded their spirit like a slow poison. Ron's outburst was the most visible symptom, but all three were affected. When Hermione snapped or Harry brooded in silence, the roots of the medallion's influence were obvious. Rowling illustrates this gradual disintegration of trust with a sharp clarity. It was as though the locket had become the heaviest burden in the world, dragging at Harry's neck, whispering doubts he could not silence. The clear danger was that the Horcrux was not just an object to be destroyed, it was a weapon actively fighting against them. And here the absence of adult guidance becomes striking. Moody was gone, yes, and Dumbledore was dead, but figures like Lupin, McGonagall, or even Kingsley might have provided the wisdom necessary to break its hold before it tore them apart. The reasoning behind their silence was tangled in equal parts secrecy and mistrust. Dumbledore had told Harry that the mission was his alone, that Voldemort's defeat lay in destroying the Horcruxes. But the instructions were vague, the tools incomplete, and the dangers far greater than the young trio could manage. Even Hermione, with all her brilliance, admitted that they had no idea how to destroy it. Yet when confronted with the choice of involving others, they withdrew further into themselves. The reader can sense the hesitation, the unspoken fear that others would not understand or would interfere. It is a tragic irony, for the very people they avoided might have been the ones capable of saving them from the spiral into despair. Imagine, for example, if Harry had written a message to Minerva McGonagall. Though Hogwarts was no longer safe, McGonagall's knowledge of magical history and her network of allies could have connected them to spells or ancient magic unknown to the trio. Even Lupin, who had briefly visited them at Grimmauld Place, might have recognized the locket's corrosive influence and sought out ways to weaken it. Rowling herself shows that other figures later in the novel, such as the goblin Griphook with the sword of Gryffindor, or Aberforth Dumbledore with his hidden support, were capable of offering crucial aid. That these resources existed proves that help was never entirely out of reach, only unasked for. The toll of their secrecy grows most visible when Ron abandons them. The scene is one of the most painful in the series because it reveals just how thoroughly the Horcrux magnified his doubts. Ron's jealousy and insecurity, long simmering beneath the surface, were given a cruel voice by the locket. "He's always going to be first, isn't he?" Ron bursts out, words that sting Harry and Hermione as deeply as any curse. The moment feels raw and human, yet it is equally preventable. Had the medallion been destroyed earlier, had guidance been sought, this fracture might never have occurred. The abandonment is not just Ron's weakness, but the direct result of isolation and mistrust, consequences of Harry's choice to keep the mission shrouded. What makes this episode particularly haunting is that the knowledge of how to destroy the Horcrux was not impossibly obscure. Dumbledore had already discovered that the sword of Gryffindor, infused with basilisk venom, was capable of breaking such dark magic. Had Harry shared the existence of the locket with the Order, there is every chance that the weapon could have been retrieved sooner. Instead, months of suffering passed before they stumbled into the revelation at the Forest of Dean, where the Patronus led Harry to the sword. It was chance, not planning, that saved them. The cruelty lies in recognizing that the suffering they endured was never strictly necessary. The answer was there, waiting, while the trio endured cold nights, empty stomachs, and eroding trust. Another consequence of secrecy is seen in the way the Horcrux preyed upon Harry himself. He bore the double burden of the locket's malice and the weight of leadership, the constant pressure to appear unshaken before his friends. The internal torment is captured in Rowling's description. At night, he would lie awake, feeling the cold metal against his skin, hearing a hissing voice that told him he was weak, that he would fail. To carry such darkness and refuse to seek comfort or counsel from others reveals a stubbornness that borders on self-destructive pride. And yet Harry's silence is understandable. He was told time and again that the task was his alone. The tragedy is that he mistook solitude for responsibility, failing to see that true leadership often means knowing when to ask for aid. Number 18, the Dragon Task. During the Triwizard Tournament, the moment Harry Potter discovered what his first task would be, he was not standing in front of Albus Dumbledore or Minerva McGonagall, nor was he given an official explanation by the Ministry. Instead, the truth revealed itself in the flicker of torchlight when he accompanied Rubeus Hagrid into the shadows of the Forbidden Forest. There, hidden under the cloak of night, Harry realized with sudden terror that he was expected to fight a dragon. It was a revelation that was never meant to be passed down in whispers. It should have come with instruction, preparation, and safeguards. Yet Harry stood beside Hagrid, watching as the massive Hungarian horntail shifted its wings, sparks erupting from its jaws, and all he could think was how unprepared he was. At that instant, the reasonable choice would have been to seek out Dumbledore, the very wizard who could have explained, advised, or even intervened in the dangerous manipulation of the tournament. But Harry stayed silent. The irony of the situation was striking. The tournament was meant to test skill, courage, and ingenuity, yet in its very design lay a brutal trap. When Harry realized that he was to face a fire-breathing monster, he also knew that no official warning had been given to him, nor to the other champions, in a fair and transparent way. What he learned came not from his professors, but from a chance encounter, when Hagrid, too fond of showing him wonders, decided to parade the dragons under cover of secrecy. Even then the warning was laced with danger because Hagrid trusted Harry to keep the secret, urging him not to reveal it openly. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Rowling describes his horror. Harry's heart was beating very fast. He had just seen the monstrous tail of the Hungarian horntail smash the ground, and he could almost feel the flames scorching the night air. This knowledge alone should have been enough reason to run straight to Dumbledore's office and speak, but the boy chose not to. Harry's silence in this moment reveals much about his character. He had grown accustomed to handling crises alone, shaped by years at Privet Drive where no one listened to his fears or protected him. When he found himself again facing mortal danger, instinct told him to bear the burden without complaint. The flaw in this decision was not merely personal, it exposed the darker truth that Hogwarts, under the weight of the Triwizard Tournament, had left a 14-year-old without sufficient guidance. Yet Harry did not demand clarity. The boy who had faced trolls and dementors simply assumed he had no choice but to endure. His decision not to speak reflects a learned habit of isolation, a belief that no adult authority would or could shield him. Another layer of the tragedy is that Harry's knowledge was not exclusive. Victor Crumb, Fleur Delacour, and Cedric Diggory also became aware of the dragons ahead of time, each through whispers, mentors, or chance discoveries. The structure of the tournament practically encouraged secrecy and sabotage rather than open preparation. But Harry's case was distinct because he had in Dumbledore someone who might have changed the narrative had he been told directly. Instead, the information remained locked within Harry's mind, shared only with Cedric as an act of fairness. Dumbledore, the one figure with enough authority to challenge the Ministry's recklessness, was left ignorant of how Harry learned of the trial and of the depth of his fear. Why did Harry not confide in him? The answer is tied to the web of manipulation that hung over the tournament. The boy was already under scrutiny, suspected of cheating to enter the competition. If he had gone to Dumbledore, others might have accused him of seeking advantage, or worse, of complaining that the tournament was unfair. Harry dreaded being misunderstood more than he dreaded the dragon itself. The shame of being branded a liar, as Rita Skeeter painted him in the Daily Prophet, weighed heavily on him. He was, after all, still a schoolboy who longed for the respect of his peers. To speak out might have seemed like weakness. Thus silence became his shield. In narrative terms, this choice heightens the drama. The boy who lived had survived Voldemort's curse as an infant, but now faced a creature of legend with no safety net. The tension comes not only from the looming dragon, but from the haunting thought that Harry's suffering was avoidable. If Dumbledore had known earlier, if McGonagall had been warned, there might have been protective measures. Instead, Rowling crafted a scene where Harry walked into the arena alone, his only preparation being Mad-Eye Moody's hint about using his broomstick. The fact that even this guidance came through covert channels underlines the failure of transparency. Harry was navigating a maze of secrets where every adult seemed complicit in silence. Harry's moral compass did drive him to warn Cedric Diggory, and this moment is telling. Despite his own terror, he could not allow Cedric to walk blindly into a death trap. Rowling describes how he struggled with the decision, but ultimately told Cedric about the dragons, knowing it was the right thing to do. This act stands in sharp contrast with his reluctance to involve Dumbledore. For Harry, peers were easier to approach than authority figures, perhaps because he still feared authority as something that might punish him rather than protect him. His act of kindness towards Cedric later became a haunting memory, since Cedric's fate in the graveyard turned the entire tournament into a symbol of betrayal and loss. The dragon task itself emphasizes what was at stake. Facing the Hungarian horntail, Harry nearly lost his life. The creature's talons slashed, its fire seared the air, and only the desperate speed of his firebolt saved him. The dragon lunged again, and this time Harry barely dodged a jet of flame that singed the end of his robes, the text recounts. Every second of that trial screamed of recklessness. A 14-year-old boy was fighting for survival before a cheering crowd, while the officials sat and watched, bound by the tournament's cruel rules. Had Harry spoken up earlier, perhaps even refused to participate without full disclosure, the absurdity of the situation might have been exposed. Instead, the silence reinforced the spectacle. Harry's decision not to speak also echoes the broader theme of secrecy in the wizarding world. Throughout the series, knowledge is hidden, withheld, or manipulated, whether it is Snape's loyalties, the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries, or Dumbledore's silence about the Hallows. Harry's choice mirrors the culture around him. Silence was the currency of survival. In this way, Rowling suggests that even the bravest characters are trapped by traditions of secrecy, which ultimately enable greater tragedies. Harry's unwillingness to involve Dumbledore was less a flaw of courage than a symptom of the world he lived in. Still, the danger of his silence was personal. He risked his own life, and not in a noble sacrifice, but in unnecessary peril. This difference matters. When Harry later walked into the Forbidden Forest to face Voldemort, his silence was heroic, part of a larger plan to save others. But during the dragon task, his silence was born from fear of humiliation and mistrust of authority. It was the silence of a child who believed he had no allies. The narrative asks the reader to feel not only admiration for Harry's bravery, but frustration at the structures that left him cornered into secrecy. Another striking point is how Dumbledore himself responded afterward. The headmaster did not chastise Harry for learning about the dragons. Instead, he seemed to accept that the champions had been warned one way or another, but one cannot help imagining what he thought privately. Dumbledore, who had orchestrated battles against Grindelwald and raised the next generation of defenders, surely recognized the absurdity of pitting children against dragons. His silence, too, becomes complicit. And yet Harry never tested whether Dumbledore might have broken the rules for his safety. This is where Harry's mistrust is most heartbreaking. He could not bring himself to believe that the greatest wizard he knew might choose to protect him above all. In hindsight, the night Harry followed Hagrid into the shadows stands as a turning point. It was one of the rare times when he had a chance to ask for help, but chose instead to shoulder the burden alone. His decision tells us that courage in the wizarding world is not always about charging forward, but sometimes about admitting fear and seeking wisdom. Harry had not yet learned that lesson. Only later, through battles and losses, did he come to realize that strength often lies in leaning on others. Rowling's narrative leaves the reader haunted by the what-ifs. What if Harry had gone to Dumbledore and confessed his discovery? What if the Ministry had been forced to explain why children were being placed before dragons? What if the structure of the task had been altered under scrutiny? These questions swirl around the memory of Cedric's death because every hidden truth in the tournament built toward that catastrophe. Harry's silence over the dragon foreshadowed the silence of the adults who withheld the prophecy, the silence of the Ministry that denied Voldemort's return, and even the silence of Dumbledore, who kept Harry in the dark about his own fate. The Night of the Dragon thus symbolizes more than just a test of magic. It captures the tragic flaw of a world steeped in secrecy, where even a boy destined to save them all believed that he had to fight alone. Harry's choice not to ask for help was not cowardice nor arrogance, but a symptom of mistrust taught to him from the beginning. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest danger is not the fire of a dragon, but the silence that burns unseen. Number 19. The Dementor Attack on Privet Drive. The summer before Harry Potter's 5th year at Hogwarts was heavy with silence, unease, and a peculiar kind of loneliness that he had never experienced so sharply before. Living once again at number 4 Privet Drive, Harry found himself cut off from the wizarding world, desperate for news, and ignored by the very people he had thought might help him. His friends, Hermione and Ron, wrote to him, but their letters were short, careful, and withholding. Even Sirius Black, his godfather, gave him only vague reassurances. The sense that he was being left in the dark gnawed at him every day, and that frustration made him more vulnerable than he could ever admit. Against this backdrop, the night of the Dementor attack unfolded like a storm Harry should have prepared for, but instead had to face with nothing but his instincts and a wand in his hand. The events of that evening began with something mundane, almost petty. Harry had quarrelled with Dudley Dursley, who taunted him as he so often did. Dudley, pumped with bravado from his time with his gang, found it amusing to call Harry names, sneering about Cedric Diggory's death and mocking Harry's strangeness. The tension between them mounted until the air itself seemed charged with hostility. Then, abruptly, a deeper chill fell over the world and darkness consumed the suburban street. Harry knew that sensation immediately. The air became heavy and icy, his breath clouded, and an all too familiar. Terror seized him. Dementors, creatures Harry had thought he would never again encounter outside the prison of Azkaban, appeared out of the night, gliding toward him and his cousin. The attack was swift and merciless. Dudley, who had never seen Dementors before, was utterly defenseless. He collapsed in terror, blinded by the unnatural cold, gasping as though his very soul were being sucked out of him. Harry, though terrified, acted on instinct. He drew his wand, pointed it into the suffocating dark, and conjured the one spell he knew could save them both, Expecto Patronum. The silver stag burst from his wand, scattering the Dementors and buying him precious moments. It was, in truth, one of the bravest and most desperate acts Harry had ever committed. Yet what followed revealed not only his courage, but also his dangerous reluctance to seek help when he most needed it. After the Dementors retreated, Harry dragged Dudley back to Privet Drive. The boy was half-conscious, mumbling incoherently about the terror he had felt. For the first time in his life, Dudley Dursley had been touched by the darkness of Harry's world, and he could not comprehend it. Mrs. Figg, the eccentric old neighbour who Harry had once thought harmlessly mad, appeared and revealed herself as a squib, someone connected to the magical community but without magic herself. She urged Harry to get Dudley inside quickly and to wait for further instructions. Yet even with this shocking revelation that he had been monitored all along by allies Harry hadn't known existed, he did not attempt to contact Dumbledore, Sirius, or anyone in authority beyond her. It is worth noting that Harry's hesitation was not simple carelessness. It stemmed from the broader context of his summer. He felt abandoned by the wizarding world, excluded from the knowledge he craved, and resentful that Dumbledore, of all people, had kept him so isolated. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Rowling writes, he wanted to talk, to argue, to shout, but when it came to it, he could not find words. This emotional exhaustion dulled his instinct to reach out. Instead of seeking help, he reacted with bitterness, retreating further into himself. His failure to write immediately to Dumbledore or Sirius after the attack reflects not only his frustration, but also his growing mistrust of those who seemed to be keeping secrets from him. When the owl from the ministry arrived, coldly informing him that he had been expelled for using magic outside of school, Harry's worst fears crystallized. Though this notice was later followed by a second letter allowing him to attend a hearing, the damage was done. The ministry under Cornelius Fudge was already hostile to him, suspicious of his every move, and determined to discredit his warnings about Voldemort's return. If Harry had contacted Dumbledore at once, the headmaster could have prepared a defense more swiftly, could have intervened before the ministry framed the incident as a crime. Instead, Dumbledore's eventual intervention at the trial came late, after days of unnecessary anxiety and fear for Harry. This silence from Harry had ripple effects. His failure to ask for help gave the ministry the upper hand, at least temporarily. They seized upon the attack as an excuse to undermine him, to paint him as reckless and unstable. The boy who lived became, in their narrative, the boy who lied and broke rules. The summer trial was a political move as much as a legal one. Fudge wanted Harry silenced, and without immediate testimony from trusted figures like Dumbledore, Sirius, or even Mrs. Figg, Harry was left to appear guilty before proven innocent. The fact that Mrs. Figg eventually testified saved him, but the process could have been less perilous if Harry had reached out first. On a deeper level, this moment underscores a critical flaw in Harry's character: his reluctance to rely on others. It is a trait that recurs throughout his story. From the Triwizard Tournament, where he resisted asking for help with the dragon task until Hermione and others pushed him, to his refusal later to confide fully in his friends about his dreams and Voldemort's visions, Harry consistently hesitated to lean on those who cared about him. The Dementor attack on Privet Drive was perhaps the starkest early warning of how dangerous that tendency could be. It is striking, too, that even in this darkest of moments, Harry did not use the means available to him. He had an owl, Hedwig, who could have carried a message to Dumbledore or Sirius within hours. He knew the address at Grimmauld Place once he was taken there days later, and yet he never thought to send word in the immediate aftermath. Whether out of pride, resentment, or shock, his silence was costly. Rowling herself makes this clear in the way the trial unfolds. Harry sits alone before the Wizengamot, dwarfed by the grandeur of the courtroom, until Dumbledore appears at last to defend him. Another quote from the book highlights his isolation. It seemed incredible that Dumbledore, who had always been his stalwart defender, should sit here and not look at him. The sense of abandonment Harry felt at the trial was in part of his own making. By not reaching out sooner, he deepened the gulf that already separated him from Dumbledore that year. This rift, though temporary, shaped the entire tone of Harry's fifth year, fueling his anger, his outbursts, and his desperate need for someone to confide in. It is easy to imagine how events might have unfolded differently had Harry asked for help immediately. Dumbledore could have contacted the Ministry before they acted rashly, framing the attack as a clear case of self-defense against illegal Dementors. The fact that Dementors were present in Little Whinging at all was a sign of corruption within the Ministry, for they were under its control. If Dumbledore had been informed swiftly, he might have forced Fudge to confront the truth earlier, preventing the trial from becoming the spectacle it was. Instead, the Ministry used Harry's silence to strengthen its campaign of discrediting him. Moreover, Harry's silence put his relationship with the Dursleys in an even more precarious position. Dudley's terror and Petunia's rare acknowledgement of the wizarding world only heightened the tension in the household. Petunia revealed knowledge of Dementors, a fact that shocked Harry, showing she had more awareness of the magical world than she ever admitted. Had Harry written to Dumbledore at once, the fragile balance in the Dursley household might have been steadied by outside authority. Instead, Harry endured days of confusion and hostility, trapped once again in a house that had never been a home. The broader theme here is the cost of silence. Harry's choice not to ask for help, born of pride, frustration, and isolation, nearly led to his expulsion, deepened his rift with Dumbledore, and emboldened the Ministry in its smear campaign. The Dementor attack on Privet Drive was a turning point, not just because it exposed him to danger in the heart of the Muggle world, but because it revealed the consequences of fighting alone when allies stood ready to help. Rowling's narrative makes it clear that Harry's courage was undeniable, but courage without trust became perilous. In hindsight, the attack stands as one of the moments where Harry's character is laid bare in all its strengths and flaws. He acted with speed and skill under pressure, saving Dudley's life and driving off the Dementors. Yet he failed to take the next logical step, to trust those who might have shielded him from the political fallout. This duality, bravery mixed with stubborn silence, defined much of his fifth year, leading to the battles he fought not only against Voldemort but also against the isolation and anger within himself. The lesson of that night on Privet Drive remains etched in the narrative. Even the strongest heroes need to ask for help. Number 20. The Cursed Necklace in Hogsmeade. Under the pale November sky above Hogsmeade, the laughter of students shifted into a scream when Katie Bell was lifted into the air, her body contorted as if invisible strings had caught her. The cursed opal necklace had slipped through her gloved fingers, brushing her skin for only a second, yet that second was enough to unleash the dark magic buried in it. Harry Potter was the first to reach her, his heart pounding, his mind already tracing a line that pointed toward one person: Draco Malfoy. This was not a random accident, not a careless mistake of a shopkeeper. It was a plot, a weapon meant for someone else. And Harry knew it. What makes this episode striking is not only the violence of the curse, but Harry's reaction afterward. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling describes how McGonagall, Hagrid, and Slughorn carried Katie back to the castle, while Harry stood in the cold, shaken but burning with suspicion. "It was Malfoy. I know it was Malfoy," he said fiercely after the incident. Yet those words were not spoken to a professor. They were whispered to Ron and Hermione, his faithful companions, who by this point were used to his relentless fixation on Draco. Harry's decision to keep his suspicions within the circle of his friends and not forcefully present them to Dumbledore or McGonagall is the heart of this mystery. The necklace, purchased by Katie under the Imperius curse, was meant for Dumbledore. The curse had been designed with a lethal precision, yet Harry, even when he recognized the gravity of the attack, chose the path of self-investigation. In one of the most telling moments, he insists to his friends, "It's Malfoy who gave that package to Madame Rosmerta, I'm sure of it." The certainty in his voice contrasts with his silence in front of authority. He feared perhaps the rolling eyes of McGonagall or the stern skepticism of Snape. By then, Harry had been dismissed so often that he expected disbelief before he even opened his mouth. The tragedy is that Harry was not wrong. Malfoy was indeed orchestrating attempts on Dumbledore's life. But the way Harry handled the necklace incident ensured that his suspicion stayed in the realm of theory rather than action. Had he gone straight to Dumbledore and demanded to be heard, the investigation could have accelerated. Yet the boy, who once shouted in Umbridge's face during 5th year, now hesitated, second-guessed himself, and settled for following Malfoy through the castle corridors like a secret shadow. This reveals something deeper about Harry's character. His life had trained him to distrust authority, from the Dursleys, who never listened, to the Ministry of Magic, which denied Voldemort's return, to teachers who often brushed him aside as paranoid. Harry grew to believe that the truth, even when obvious, would always be denied. When he saw Katie writhing in agony from a curse that no ordinary Hogwarts student could cast, the weight of evidence should have been enough. But he did not place it into the hands of adults. He clutched it close as if fearing it would be dismissed once more. The irony lies in the fact that Dumbledore more than ever was ready to listen. In Half-Blood Prince, he repeatedly tells Harry, "I count on you." Dumbledore trusted Harry's instincts, yet Harry did not fully trust Dumbledore with his suspicions about Malfoy. He brought them up occasionally, almost defensively, but never pushed with the urgency the situation required. Instead, his efforts were directed into secret pursuits, following Malfoy under the invisibility cloak, interrogating Slughorn about Horcruxes, dividing his energy between personal missions instead of collaborating with those who had the authority to act. The necklace episode is a perfect example of Harry's tendency to confuse instinct with proof. His gut told him the truth, but he lacked the tangible evidence he believed professors would demand. When Hermione countered his obsession with Malfoy by saying, "You've got no proof," Harry responded with frustration rather than strategy. Instead of building a case, gathering testimonies, or persuading his elders with reason, he buried himself in half-formed surveillance missions that only increased his isolation. He became a lone investigator in a castle full of adults who had more experience, more resources, and more power to stop Malfoy's schemes. In hindsight, the decision to act alone amplified the danger. Katie nearly died, Ron would soon be poisoned, and Draco would continue his desperate mission unimpeded until the final confrontation atop the astronomy tower. Each attack was a warning, a chance for intervention, but Harry's suspicion, locked inside the walls of Gryffindor Tower, became more like an obsession than a plan. He had convinced himself that no one would believe him, and in doing so, he prevented others from even having the chance to weigh the evidence. The episode also reflects the burden of being the chosen one. Harry's identity often pushed him toward solitary action, as if destiny itself demanded he stand alone. When he saw Katie fall, he reacted not as a student who could immediately summon help from trusted professors, but as the sole detective of Hogwarts. His role as the one who must fight Voldemort infected his approach to smaller mysteries. He acted as though every clue belonged to him, as though sharing it would somehow weaken his mission. The result was a suffocating loneliness that blinded him to allies who might have changed the course of events. There is also the lingering shadow of Snape. Harry's loathing of Snape, combined with Snape's constant ridicule, made Harry less likely to confide in authority figures. To admit suspicions about Malfoy to Snape would have been impossible. To admit them to McGonagall would have been easier, yet Harry carried the fear that she too might dismiss him with a raised eyebrow. The years of being called a liar by the Ministry, of being painted as unstable in the newspapers, carved into Harry a reflex of silence. By the time Katie touched the necklace, silence had become second nature. The cursed necklace was not just a plot device, it was a test of communication. It revealed how Harry handled fear, suspicion, and responsibility. His failure to act decisively in sharing his suspicions mirrors a theme throughout the series: the danger of isolation. When characters conceal truth, whether it is Dumbledore hiding the prophecy, Snape guarding his double life, or Harry keeping his visions private, the result is suffering. The opal necklace became one more symbol of secrecy in a castle drowning in it. What makes the story compelling is that Harry's instincts were vindicated in the end. Malfoy was guilty. The cursed necklace was his attempt, through Rosmerta and the Imperius Curse, to kill Dumbledore. But Harry gained no victory from being right, because being right was not enough. Justice in the wizarding world required collaboration, persuasion, and trust. Harry had the first but not the others, and so the attacks continued. Katie's suffering became a chapter in a longer tragedy that might have been prevented had Harry used his voice as strongly as he used his wand. This episode also foreshadows the challenges Harry would face in Deathly Hallows. His journey to defeat Voldemort depended not only on bravery, but on the ability to trust others with knowledge. The cursed necklace in Hogsmeade showed how difficult that lesson was for him. Even as he grew older, the scars of disbelief shaped his choices. The decision to carry the burden alone, to hold suspicion rather than share it, nearly cost him and his friends their lives. In the end, the cursed opal necklace is more than an object of dark magic. It is a mirror held up to Harry's flaws, his suspicion, his isolation, his unwillingness to seek help. The tragedy of Katie Bell's suffering lies not only in Malfoy's plot, but in Harry's silence. The boy who lived was brave enough to face dragons and dementors, but in that crucial moment in Hogsmeade, he was not brave enough to walk into Dumbledore's office, look him in the eye, and say with certainty, "Draco Malfoy is trying to kill you." That silence remains one of the haunting mysteries of Half-Blood Prince. Number 21. Malfoy's Secret Mission. Harry Potter, in his 6th year at Hogwarts, found himself in one of the most troubling dilemmas of his school career, and it had nothing to do with potions, Quidditch, or even his difficult relationship with Snape. It was Draco Malfoy. From the moment the Hogwarts Express set off, Harry became obsessed with the idea that Malfoy had taken the Dark Mark and had been given a mission by Lord Voldemort himself. His suspicion began on that train ride when he snuck after Malfoy and overheard enough to fuel his paranoia. In fact, the text makes clear that Malfoy's words shook him deeply. "You'll be able to see me doing it. I'm not going to tell you what it is, though." For Harry, who already saw Malfoy as arrogant and cruel, this was proof that something larger was at play. The tragic irony is that he had fragments of truth in his hands, yet his determination to solve the mystery alone kept him from sharing crucial evidence with those who could have acted. Throughout the year, Harry's obsession with Malfoy became one of his defining features. He spent nights tracking Malfoy's movements on the Marauders map. He spied on him in the corridors, and he even risked detentions trying to catch him in the act of some dark deed. What he did not do was confide in Albus Dumbledore or Professor McGonagall in a way that might have triggered intervention. He would drop hints to Ron and Hermione, who largely dismissed his theories as exaggerations. Harry, however, was convinced. "Malfoy's a Death Eater, I know it," he repeated constantly, but conviction without action only deepened his isolation. The boy who had spent years defying rules and seeking truth now cornered himself in a private investigation, one that only he seemed to take seriously. The secret Malfoy was hiding was monumental. He had been tasked with repairing the vanishing cabinet in the Room of Requirement to allow Death Eaters into Hogwarts. Malfoy himself was consumed by fear and stress, a 16-year-old drowning in a mission he could hardly manage. The tragedy of the story is that Harry had seen enough to suspect exactly where Malfoy was working and what he was plotting. He even saw Malfoy disappear into the Room of Requirement repeatedly. And yet, instead of taking this directly to Dumbledore, he stalked him like an amateur detective. A single conversation with McGonagall might have brought Aurors to investigate the room, might have discovered the cabinet before it was too late, and might have prevented the events of the lightning-struck tower. What makes this episode so striking is the way J.K. Rowling layers the evidence before Harry. He notices Malfoy growing thinner, paler, and increasingly anxious. He spies him, crying in the bathroom, breaking down under the weight of his task. He observes him constantly vanishing from the Great Hall and the library. The reader is shown all these signs, and Harry does notice them, but he interprets them exclusively through his lens of suspicion. He is right about Malfoy being involved with Voldemort, but he is wrong in assuming that secrecy and obsession are the right tools to uncover the truth. Instead, his choice to keep this as a private mission blinds him to the possibility of compassion or strategic alliance with his teachers. There is a telling passage when Harry speaks of Malfoy to Dumbledore, but in passing, never pressing the urgency. "I think Malfoy's working for Voldemort," he mutters, but the conversation is swept into larger issues, and Harry does not persist. This failure to insist, to demand that adults take notice, demonstrates both his stubborn independence and his mistrust of authority. Years of being ignored at the Dursleys, years of being disbelieved by the Ministry, trained him to think that shouting the truth would be useless. He therefore fell into the trap of believing that the burden of discovery rested only on his shoulders. In a sense, Harry became his own jailer, refusing to open the door to those who could help. The duel in the bathroom between Harry and Malfoy stands as the clearest symbol of this failed approach. Fueled by frustration and suspicion, Harry follows Malfoy into the boys' lavatory, and when the fight breaks out, he uses Sectum Sempra, a curse he had only just discovered in the Half-Blood Prince's book. The effect is devastating, leaving Malfoy bleeding heavily on the floor. Here, Harry's obsession culminates not in revelation, but in violence. It is telling that the only true glimpse he has of Malfoy's pain is when he sees him crying beforehand and when he sees him bleeding afterward. Had Harry approached Dumbledore or McGonagall instead of stalking Malfoy with rage, the tragedy of that duel could have been avoided, and Malfoy's torment might have been addressed. Harry's isolation in this matter also strained his friendships. Ron and Hermione, while loyal, became weary of hearing about Malfoy. They would point to Harry's lack of evidence and tell him he was imagining things. This created a cycle where Harry, feeling unsupported, dug deeper into his obsession, further alienating himself. The sad irony is that Hermione, with her love for research, and Ron, with his keen knowledge of wizarding families, could have been valuable allies if Harry had not been so consumed with convincing them instead of collaborating with them. It reveals how Harry's tunnel vision cut him off from the very teamwork that had always sustained him. The room of requirement itself symbolizes Harry's blindness. He knew the room could transform into whatever one needed. He even used it in earlier years for Dumbledore's army. Yet when he discovered Malfoy using it, he did not attempt to penetrate the secret by sharing his suspicion with professors who might know how to force the room to reveal its contents. Harry, fixated on personal discovery, tried clumsy attempts to follow Malfoy in, only to fail. "He's using it every day. I've seen him on the map," Harry insisted. Still, he took no step to alert Dumbledore with urgency. The very room that held the key to Voldemort's invasion remained hidden because Harry would not surrender his lone pursuit. There is a tragic thread woven through these events. Harry, the boy who lived, was also the boy who distrusted. His mistrust of adults, his history of being silenced by the Ministry, and his fierce independence shaped his response to Malfoy's secret. He saw the threat clearly, but he believed it was his responsibility to expose it. This burden was not necessary, and it cost him dearly. When the Death Eaters entered Hogwarts through the repaired cabinet and Dumbledore fell on the tower, the weight of Harry's silence could not be ignored. He had been right about Malfoy, but being right was not enough. The narrative of the Half-Blood Prince makes Malfoy's torment painfully visible to the reader. When Harry witnesses him sobbing in front of Moaning Myrtle, it is the first time he realizes that Malfoy is not triumphant, but desperate. "I can't do it," Malfoy gasps, and in those words the entire plot becomes clear. Harry does not relay this breakdown to anyone. Instead, he chooses to keep it inside as though it were just another piece of evidence in his private case. Had he gone to McGonagall that night and reported Malfoy's despair, the arc of the year might have changed dramatically, but Harry's silence remained his greatest mistake. Dumbledore himself, when later confronting Harry about Malfoy, shows awareness of the situation. He tells Harry that Malfoy had been given a mission, but was faltering. Yet Dumbledore had not been told of the details Harry witnessed. This gap is crucial. Dumbledore, frail and dying already, might have arranged protections differently if Harry had confided every detail of Malfoy's actions. Instead, the final confrontation on the Astronomy Tower unfolded as Voldemort had designed, with Snape fulfilling the vow he had made to Narcissa and Bellatrix. Harry's choice of secrecy contributed, however indirectly, to the tragedy of that night. There is also the moral weight of Harry's mistake. For once, his flaw was not recklessness, but silence. He had been reckless before, sneaking into the Forbidden Forest, flying to the Ministry, chasing after visions of Sirius, but here he erred by withholding information. It is a subtle inversion of his usual flaw, but equally dangerous. It shows that heroism is not only about action, but about trust. Harry's inability to trust his teachers with the truth about Malfoy highlights the lonely burden he carried, a burden that was not his alone to bear. In many ways, this episode reflects the theme of adolescence itself. Teenagers often believe adults will not understand them, that their truths will be dismissed. Harry embodies this mindset perfectly. He refuses to share his suspicions because he fears dismissal, yet that very refusal leaves him more isolated and vulnerable. Malfoy, ironically, is in the same position, a boy carrying an unbearable secret alone. Two 16-year-olds, each drowning in secrecy, unable to reach out for help, become mirrors of each other's suffering. The story also exposes the limits of bravery. Harry was brave enough to fight Death Eaters, to face Voldemort himself, but not brave enough to lay aside his pride and ask for help. This paradox underscores the humanity of his character. Courage does not always mean duels and danger. Sometimes it means opening your mouth and trusting another with the truth. Harry did not find that courage in the case of Malfoy, and the price was paid on the night of Dumbledore's death. Looking back, the sixth book is haunted by this failure of communication. Harry had the clues, he had the instincts, he had the map. What he lacked was the humility to seek guidance. "I know he's up to something," he said, but it remained a statement, not an action. The secret of Draco Malfoy became the tragedy of Harry's silence, a reminder that even heroes can falter when they choose solitude over trust. Number 22. Snape's final revelations. Harry Potter's journey has always been defined by secrets withheld from him, truths buried beneath layers of silence and choices made in ignorance. One of the most haunting examples emerges at the very end of his story, when Severus Snape, moments before his death in the Shrieking Shack, passes his memories to Harry. In those brief moments, Harry receives the key to understanding everything that has been hidden from him, the truth of Voldemort's Horcruxes, the depth of Snape's devotion to Lily Evans, and the chilling revelation that Harry himself must die for Voldemort to fall. Yet this knowledge arrives at the last possible moment, when the battle is raging and lives are being torn apart. What makes this silence so unbearable is the realization that Harry could have asked the right questions earlier, of Snape, of Dumbledore while he was still alive, even of Fawkes, the Phoenix, who had always appeared at moments of greatest need. But Harry did not. He endured his journey, armed with courage and instinct, but not with clarity. Throughout the series, Harry had opportunities to demand explanations from Dumbledore. He trusted the old headmaster, loved him with a mixture of reverence and frustration, but often accepted cryptic half-answers without protest. Dumbledore would say, "In time, Harry, you will know," or "You need not understand now, but you will." Harry rarely pressed further, partly out of respect, partly out of a reluctance to confront the possibility that he might not be prepared for the answers. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore avoids Harry for months, Harry feels abandoned but never forces a confrontation until anger finally boils over. That same hesitancy follows him into the final book, when crucial knowledge remains hidden, waiting for the moment of Snape's death to be revealed. If Harry had pushed harder earlier, perhaps the revelations would not have come so late. Consider Snape himself, a man whose cold demeanor made him the least approachable of all Harry's professors. Yet even in their hostility, there were moments when Harry sensed something deeper, an undercurrent of mystery in Snape's actions. After the flight from Privet Drive in Deathly Hallows, Harry learns that it was Snape's curse that sliced George Weasley's ear. Still, he cannot reconcile the actions of a man who both harms and protects. Snape continues to act in ways that defy easy categorization. But Harry never once tries to reach beyond his hatred and demand the truth of Snape's divided loyalties. When Snape insists, "Potter, you have your mother's eyes," the words are brushed aside as insults or obsessions. Only in the pensive, when Snape's memories spill open, does Harry understand that every action, every bitterness, was entwined with a desperate promise to protect Lily's son. Had Harry been willing to confront him directly, the silence might have broken sooner. The secrecy surrounding Horcruxes is perhaps the most striking example of what Harry could have uncovered. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore leads him through Tom Riddle's memories, piecing together the dark magic of Horcruxes. But Dumbledore never tells him everything, especially the final, unbearable truth that Harry himself carries a fragment of Voldemort's soul. Dumbledore confesses in King's Cross that he could not bring himself to burden Harry with this knowledge while he was still alive. He hoped Harry would be strong enough to face death when the time came, but he also delayed out of fear and love. Harry, meanwhile, asked many questions, but never the one that would have shattered the silence. Am I one of the Horcruxes? That question hung in the air, unspoken, even though the evidence was there. The pain in his scar, the strange connection to Voldemort's mind, the ability to speak Parseltongue. The signs were screaming at him, but Harry chose to endure them rather than demand their explanation. There is an almost tragic irony in the fact that Harry was surrounded by figures who could have guided him, but he rarely turned to them with the persistence that might have changed his path. Fawkes, the Phoenix, had appeared when Harry needed rescue, healing him in the Chamber of Secrets and carrying him out with the Sword of Gryffindor. In the mythology of the series, Fawkes symbolizes renewal, the fire that consumes and restores. Harry, however, never thought to reach for Fawkes after Dumbledore's death, never asked the creature that had served the headmaster so faithfully whether it might hold any clue to the mysteries left behind. The Phoenix departs Hogwarts after Dumbledore's funeral, and with it, any chance of learning through that ancient bond. Silence becomes the dominant force in Harry's life. When Snape lies dying in the shrieking shack, the weight of all those unasked questions crashes down. His final gift, the memories poured into Harry's hands, reveals truths so immense that they reshape the entire war. Harry sees Snape's anguished words to Dumbledore. "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the proper moment?" He hears Dumbledore confirm, "You alone know what must be done." In those fragments, Harry confronts the plan that had guided his life without his knowledge. The truth had always existed, buried in the secrecy of adults who believed they knew what was best for him. Harry's silence, his unwillingness to demand clarity, meant that he stepped into every danger without full understanding. It is essential to recognize that Harry's reluctance to ask questions was not simple negligence. It was rooted in his character. He was raised in silence, taught by the Dursleys that his questions were worthless. At Hogwarts, his instinct was to act rather than to analyze, to throw himself into danger for the sake of friends, rather than to pause and interrogate the mysteries surrounding him. He survived the Triwizard Tournament, the Ministry Battle, and countless encounters with Death Eaters through courage, not comprehension. This temperament made him both heroic and vulnerable. When Dumbledore told him, "You are protected by your ability to love," Harry believed it, but never questioned what darker truths were left unsaid. The tragedy of his silence becomes most visible when he walks into the Forbidden Forest to face Voldemort. He knows, finally, that he is the seventh Horcrux, that a fragment of Voldemort's soul lives within him, and that he must die to destroy it. But imagine if he had known this truth earlier, perhaps in the months of wandering with Ron and Hermione, or even at the beginning of their quest. The entire journey might have been shaped differently. Instead of stumbling through forests and guesses, Harry might have prepared himself, emotionally and strategically, for the sacrifice he would one day make. Instead, the revelation comes only when the clock has nearly run out, when hesitation is impossible. One cannot ignore the narrative brilliance of J.K. Rowling's choice to withhold these truths until the very end. It creates the devastating weight of Snape's memories, transforming him from villain to tragic hero in Harry's eyes. But within the story's logic, it also illustrates how silence can cost dearly. Harry's inability to demand answers from Dumbledore or Snape sooner meant that lives were lost in the chaos of incomplete knowledge. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, would their deaths have been prevented if Harry had known the truth earlier? The story does not answer, but the question lingers. The bond between Harry and Snape is a particularly painful example of this silence. All along, Snape was fighting for him, driven by Lily's memory. Yet Harry despised him, never seeking to understand his bitterness or the contradictions in his behavior. When Harry finally looks into Snape's memories and whispers, "Look at me," as Snape's final request, the silence is broken too late. Understanding comes only when the man is gone. Their entire relationship is defined by words unsaid, questions unasked, and truths withheld. Even Dumbledore, whose wisdom shaped Harry's path, admitted to failing him in this regard. In King's Cross, he tells Harry, "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth." It is a confession that reveals how even love can become an obstacle to honesty. But Dumbledore's choice was only half of the silence. The other half was Harry's. He loved Dumbledore, trusted him so deeply that he rarely forced the headmaster to speak plainly. That trust became a shield against the unbearable reality. In the end, it delayed Harry's understanding until the moment when sacrifice was the only option. There is something deeply human in Harry's silence. Most of us avoid questions whose answers might terrify us. Harry avoided asking if he might be tied to Voldemort in ways he could not endure to hear. He avoided demanding why Snape acted with such contradictory cruelty. He avoided confronting Dumbledore with accusations that might shatter his faith in the old man. This silence kept him moving forward, but it also blinded him. When the revelations finally arrived, they nearly crushed him under their weight. In the end, the story of Harry and Snape's final encounter is not only about sacrifice or redemption, it is about the cost of unanswered questions. The memories Snape gives Harry illuminate a world of truth that had been waiting all along, but Harry's journey proves that silence can be as dangerous as any curse. His courage carried him, but his refusal or inability to demand clarity left him unprepared for the truth that defined his destiny. The forest walk, the acceptance of death, the final duel with Voldemort, all unfolded in the shadow of revelations that came too late. Harry's story, then, becomes not just one of bravery, but also a meditation on the price of silence. By the time he held Snape's memories, the cost had already been paid in blood and loss. The silence of the past could not be undone. What remained was the burden of truth, carried alone, too late to change what had already been set in motion. Number 23, the broken wand. Of all the mistakes Harry Potter made during his long struggle against Voldemort, one of the strangest was his silence after his wand broke. The moment took place in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, right after Harry, Hermione and Ron barely escaped from the Ministry of Magic. Their daring infiltration had ended in chaos, and the trio disapparated in a panic. They landed in the Forest of Dean, battered, frightened and shaken. In the midst of this confusion, Harry realized that his most precious weapon had been snapped. His holly and phoenix feather wand, the one that had chosen him at age 11, the tool that had seen him through duels with Death Eaters, encounters with dragons, and countless other dangers, was now useless. The boy who lived, the one who carried the weight of prophecy, stood defenseless in the darkest moment of the war. The text describes his devastation in almost physical terms. The wand spun off into the darkness, and Harry heard it crack. He snatched it up, and a moment later realized with a sickening lurch of the stomach that it was broken. This was not a mere object. This was the wand that had carried part of his very identity, a link to his victories, his survival, his childhood. And yet, despite the enormity of this loss, Harry's reaction was strangely passive. He felt despair, but he did not immediately consider solutions. He mourned, but he did not reach out for help. It was as if, for the first time in his journey, he accepted a sense of helplessness without protest. It is worth remembering that Harry was not without allies at this point. He had Hermione, a brilliant witch whose mind had always been quick to find unconventional solutions. She had already shown her resourcefulness by preparing the enchanted beaded bag filled with supplies, including books and potions, that saved them time and time again. Harry also had contact with Ron, whose loyalty and perspective, though sometimes flawed, often balanced Harry's impulses. Beyond his two closest friends, there were other potential sources of wisdom. Mr. Ollivander, the greatest wand-maker in Britain, though at that moment imprisoned, would soon come under their care. Even before rescuing Ollivander, Harry might have attempted to find an alternative wand from allies in the Order of the Phoenix, such as Remus Lupin, or even Professor McGonagall, who surely would have understood the urgency of his situation. Yet none of these options were considered. The contrast is striking when one recalls how desperate Harry had been in earlier books when deprived of his wand. In Chamber of Secrets, his panic at losing it in the dueling club showed how instinctively he valued it. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he carried it with constant vigilance, aware that Sirius Black might strike at any moment. But here, in the forest, when the stakes were higher than ever, he behaved almost as if fate had decided the matter for him, and he chose to accept it. The psychological exhaustion of constant pursuit, the trauma of near-death experiences, and the oppressive weight of prophecy had taken their toll. Hermione did notice his despair and even tried to repair the wand with a reparo charm, but the attempt failed. She moved on, focusing on their Horcrux mission. Harry, however, never pressed the matter further. He never demanded that they explore every magical possibility, never argued that this was a problem that could decide his survival. In the text, Rowling underlines the hopelessness. Hermione's spell had not worked. The wand lay broken beyond mending a useless twig. This quiet resignation was unusual for Harry, who was usually quick to act, even recklessly, when danger loomed. What makes this silence even more puzzling is that Ollivander himself, when finally rescued from Malfoy Manor, might have offered guidance. Here was a man who dedicated his life to the study of wand lore. Had Harry pressed him, perhaps Ollivander would have suggested a temporary replacement, or even explained more about the deeper connections between wizard and wand. Ollivander did later explain the strange twin-core connection between Harry's wand and Voldemort's, knowledge that altered the course of events, yet Harry did not seize this earlier chance. One might argue that Harry's refusal to ask for help came from pride. Throughout the series, he was marked by a tendency to carry burdens alone, convinced that no one else could truly understand the weight of his responsibility. Dumbledore himself had encouraged this solitary path by telling Harry he must be the one to face Voldemort. But pride was not the only factor. There was also guilt. The Ministry infiltration had been his idea, and it had nearly cost them their lives. In the aftermath, he may have felt unworthy of leaning too heavily on Hermione or Ron, both of whom had risked everything for him. Silence, in this case, might have been his way of punishing himself. The tragedy of this decision lies in the alternatives that existed. Other wizards had managed without their own wands by borrowing or adapting. Hermione herself began to use Bellatrix Lestrange's wand after the escape from Malfoy Manor. Later, Harry would briefly use Draco Malfoy's wand. The story clearly shows that substitutions were possible, even if imperfect. Yet for weeks Harry clung to his broken wand as if its useless fragments still anchored him, without taking proactive steps. It was almost as though he was waiting for destiny to intervene, which it eventually did with the Elder Wand. But destiny should never have been the plan. The broken wand became a symbol of Harry's fragility at this stage of the journey. Physically, he was cold, hungry, and hunted. Spiritually, he was without Dumbledore's guidance and tormented by doubt. The useless wand in his pocket was a reminder that even the tools he had once trusted most could fail him. Rowling herself emphasizes his inner collapse when she writes, "Harry could not help feeling that everything was slipping beyond his control." This resignation is what makes his lack of appeal for help so haunting. The irony is that Hermione, always practical, would likely have been relentless had her own wand broken. She might have researched wand lore, experimented with magical substitutes, or even attempted dangerous spells to create a temporary solution. But Harry, who had always been the boldest of the trio, faltered in this respect. He leaned into despair rather than determination. This reversal of roles underlines how disoriented and exhausted he had become. When one considers how the plot unfolded, the implications are startling. If Harry had pursued an answer earlier, he might have avoided the near-fatal duel with Nagini in Godric's Hollow, where his lack of a strong wand left him defenseless. He might also have confronted Voldemort with more confidence, without relying on the miraculous twist of wand lore that allowed him to claim the Elder Wand. His survival, in many ways, was contingent on accidents rather than strategy. This flaw in his character, his reluctance to ask for help, appears in other moments of the series. In Order of the Phoenix, he resisted sharing his visions with Dumbledore, leading to the disastrous ambush at the Department of Mysteries. In Half-Blood Prince, he withheld suspicions about Draco Malfoy until late in the year. Again and again, Harry chose silence, and again the cost was high. The broken wand episode was simply the sharpest example of this tendency, one that exposed him to unnecessary danger. In hindsight, Harry's unwillingness to seek aid with his broken wand reminds the reader of a broader truth in his story. The battle against Voldemort was not just about spells and bravery, but about the human ability to share burdens and rely on others. Harry's final triumph, after all, came not from solitary power, but from the collective love, loyalty, and sacrifice of friends and allies. His silence in the forest stands as a quiet counterpoint to that message, a moment when he nearly lost everything by refusing to reach out. The broken wand was eventually replaced not by a plan, but by chance, when Harry disarmed Draco Malfoy and unknowingly became master of the Elder Wand. That twist of fate turned his helplessness into strength, but the lesson of that episode lingers. Harry could have sought help. He could have asked Ollivander, or pleaded with Hermione to dig deeper, or even borrowed another wand outright. His silence was a failure not of magic, but of trust. And though fate intervened, the story reminds us that silence and pride can be as dangerous as any curse. Number 24. Keeping Horcruxes from Ron and Hermione. Harry Potter had been warned early by Albus Dumbledore that the path ahead would be darker and lonelier than anything he had faced before. When Dumbledore revealed the truth about Voldemort's Horcruxes in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the revelation carried the weight of a final mission. Dumbledore entrusted Harry with knowledge that even the wizarding world's brightest minds might not have been able to handle. And yet when Harry walked out of the headmaster's office with the echo of the words, "You are the Horcruxes' destroyer," ringing in his ears, he also carried another decision, one he made instinctively and without much thought, that he would not immediately share the full truth with Ron Weasley or Hermione Granger. This unspoken choice would shape the coming months of their lives, creating tensions that nearly tore their friendship apart. The problem lay in Harry's deep-seated habit of bearing his burdens alone. From his earliest days at Privet Drive, when the Dursleys dismissed him as unwanted, Harry had been trained by circumstance to keep secrets. He had learned that no one else would understand what it meant to be singled out, marked, and chosen against his will. Even when friendship came into his life through Ron and Hermione, and later through the Order of the Phoenix, Harry often defaulted to silence. The Horcruxes were no exception. Dumbledore had shown Harry the locket, the cup, the diary, the ring, and explained their sinister magic. But when Harry left that office, he did not immediately sit down with Ron and Hermione to outline the grim details. Instead, he carried it like a locked chest inside his mind. Hermione, always perceptive, sensed something was being withheld long before the truth emerged. She had often reminded Harry that they worked best when united. In Half-Blood Prince, she told him bluntly, "We're with you whatever happens." Ron, in his more casual but equally loyal way, echoed this sentiment. Yet Harry hesitated. Perhaps he feared the knowledge would burden them too heavily. Perhaps he feared that if he spoke the words aloud, Horcruxes, fragments of soul, the grisly task of hunting them down, the reality of the mission would solidify in a way he wasn't ready to face. So he waited, and with that waiting, cracks began to form in their bond. When Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower and the war spilled into every corner of Britain, Harry finally resolved to tell them, though not in full. At the Burrow, in those tense days before Bill and Fleur's wedding, Harry attempted to share pieces of the plan. Still, the explanations came haltingly, leaving Ron and Hermione with gaps they were left to fill on their own. Hermione, to her credit, guessed much of the danger ahead, and even packed Mary Poppins-like supplies into her enchanted bag. Ron, meanwhile, took Harry's vague instructions at face value, trusting him even as doubt gnawed in quiet corners. But the silence surrounding Horcruxes was not yet fully broken, and that silence planted seeds of distrust. The journey that followed after the wedding only amplified the consequences of Harry's choice. Moving from one hiding place to another, the trio faced cold, hunger, and the constant threat of discovery. Each day was a reminder that they were not merely running, but searching without clear instructions or leads. Harry's reluctance to confide everything he had learned about Horcruxes became a source of friction. He often stared into the distance, wrestling with memories of Dumbledore's words, while Ron and Hermione exchanged worried glances. Their leader had secrets, and in the silence, those secrets grew into shadows larger than the truth itself. The breaking point came with the locket, one of the Horcruxes they managed to retrieve. As they passed it between them, each wearing it for short shifts, the dark influence of the soul fragment twisted their thoughts. Ron, already burdened with insecurities about his family and his place beside Harry and Hermione, became the most vulnerable. The locket whispered to him that Harry did not value him, that Hermione's loyalty belonged elsewhere, that he was an outsider. These poisonous suggestions found fertile ground because Harry had never fully trusted Ron and Hermione with the mission's scope. When Ron accused Harry of not knowing what he was doing, the words cut both ways. They were not just the product of dark magic, but of the unspoken rift created months before when Harry chose to hold back the truth. The reader cannot ignore the irony that Dumbledore himself had warned Harry about the power of trust. In Half-Blood Prince, the headmaster reminded him, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." Yet Harry had allowed the unknown to grow inside his friendship. He had not trusted Ron and Hermione enough to turn the unknown into clarity. This secrecy led to the infamous night when Ron walked away, disappearing into the freezing darkness after a bitter quarrel. The Horcrux may have been the immediate cause, but the foundation for Ron's departure had been laid earlier, in Harry's silence. When Ron finally returned, guided back by the Deluminator's magic and his enduring love for his friends, the relief was palpable. Harry, who had nearly drowned while retrieving the sword of Gryffindor, looked up to find Ron pulling him out of the icy water. The moment was drenched with symbolism. Harry, sinking under the weight of secrets and darkness, was saved by the very friend he had once failed to trust. In Deathly Hallows, Harry admitted, "You've saved my life." But beneath those words was another unspoken acknowledgement. Harry needed Ron. He needed Hermione. The mission was never meant to be his alone. The painful lesson from this episode is that heroism can sometimes blind its bearer. Harry's belief that he alone had to carry the Horcrux secret nearly cost him the strength of his closest allies. The Golden Trio was strongest when united, each contributing their unique strengths. Hermione's intellect, Ron's loyalty, and Harry's courage formed a trinity that Voldemort could never comprehend. Voldemort, who ruled by fear and secrecy, failed to understand the power of friendship and shared knowledge, yet Harry, by clinging to secrecy, risked mirroring the very isolation that defined his enemy. One can imagine how different their journey might have been if Harry had been open from the start. Hermione could have directed her formidable research skills immediately toward Horcrux lore, saving months of uncertainty. Ron, though less bookish, could have offered perspective and strategy from his practical experience of wizarding life. By involving them earlier, Harry might have prevented the growing doubts that later erupted under the locket's influence. Their mission could have begun with clarity and purpose rather than fumbling in the dark. The narrative choice by J.K. Rowling to delay Harry's confession adds depth to the story. It exposes his humanity, his flaws, and his tendency toward self-reliance to the point of isolation. Harry is not a perfect leader. He is, in many ways, a traumatized teenager forced into impossible decisions. Readers see themselves in his mistakes because they know what it feels like to hold secrets out of fear or pride. Yet the consequences in Harry's case are magnified because the stakes are no less than the defeat of Voldemort himself. In hiding the truth, He nearly sabotaged the very mission Dumbledore entrusted to him. Another layer of complexity lies in the theme of legacy. Harry had grown accustomed to adults keeping secrets from him, the Dursleys concealing his past, Dumbledore withholding details about the prophecy, even Sirius and Lupin protecting him from grim realities. This cycle of secrecy perpetuated itself. Harry's silence about Horcruxes was not born in isolation, but was inherited from a lifetime of half-truths. Breaking that cycle required growth, and the painful fracture with Ron was the crucible that forced Harry to change. By the end of the story, he had learned to rely on others, to share knowledge rather than hoard it, and to recognize that trust was the true weapon Voldemort lacked. It is significant that in the final battle at Hogwarts, Harry chose transparency. When he walked into the Forbidden Forest to face Voldemort, he did so with the knowledge that his friends would continue the fight without him. He explained his reasoning to them, trusted them to lead, and no longer carried the mission entirely alone. The boy who once thought he must shoulder everything had become a man who understood the strength of shared sacrifice. The Horcrux secret, once withheld, had ultimately been revealed, and its burden divided among those who loved him. The story of Harry's silence about Horcruxes is not just a subplot. It is a lesson etched into the saga. It teaches that secrecy breeds division, while truth, however painful, strengthens bonds. Harry's failure to ask for help nearly destroyed his friendship with Ron and Hermione, but their eventual reconciliation underscored the resilience of loyalty. Readers are left with a reminder that even heroes need help, and that asking for it is not weakness, but wisdom. In the end, Harry's growth came not from destroying Horcruxes alone, but from realizing he never truly had to. Number 25, the Elder Wand in Voldemort's hands. After Albus Dumbledore's death, Harry Potter found himself in a world that suddenly felt colder, darker, and stripped of its guiding star. The night atop the astronomy tower ended not only with the murder of the headmaster, but also with a mystery that whispered through the castle walls. Draco Malfoy had disarmed Dumbledore. Severus Snape had cast the killing curse. And somewhere in that chain of violence lay the fate of the most powerful wand in existence, the Elder Wand. Harry was present that night, crouched under his invisibility cloak, unable to move, his voice caught in his throat as he watched the unthinkable unfold. In that frozen moment, he understood that something greater than Dumbledore's life had been shattered, but he never truly allowed himself to ask the right questions. The truth was whispered in fragments, carried on rumors and fear. Voldemort sought a weapon stronger than any other. Xenophilius Lovegood would later draw a triangle, a circle, and a line, naming the Deathly Hallows, but by then it was too late. Harry had inklings long before that moment. Dumbledore himself had dropped clues, Snape's role raised suspicions, and the legend of the wand was no secret in certain circles. But instead of laying bare his thoughts to the Order of the Phoenix, instead of asking Hermione or Ron to help him trace the ownership of Dumbledore's wand, Harry chose silence. He buried his fear inside the larger, vaguer mission Dumbledore left him: seek out and destroy the Horcruxes. He convinced himself that focusing on one task was all he could manage, yet that very choice left him blind to the growing storm. It was not as though Harry lacked allies. Minerva McGonagall, who had fought beside Dumbledore for decades, would have listened if he confessed his worry that Voldemort was after Dumbledore's wand. Lupin, who risked everything to stand with the young trio, might have provided insight from the old days of the Marauders. Even Ron, with his steady loyalty, or Hermione, with her unyielding curiosity, could have challenged Harry to face the implications. But Harry never said the words aloud. He never voiced the possibility that Voldemort would not stop at mere Horcruxes, but was reaching for something far older, something that could tilt the balance of war irreversibly. Silence was not just Harry's shield, it became his greatest mistake. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Rolling Rights, and Voldemort was now, at last, the possessor of the Elder Wand. That sentence strikes with finality, as though a curtain has fallen. By the time Harry fully realized what Voldemort had done, breaking into Dumbledore's tomb, desecrating it to seize the wand, it was too late for counsel. The Order could not stop him. The Aurors had no counter. Harry's failure to speak sooner meant that the most powerful weapon in magical history passed directly into the hands of the Dark Lord without resistance. It was an error not of ignorance but of hesitation, of refusing to ask for help when he needed it most. This was not the first time Harry had chosen to carry burdens alone. In his 5th year, haunted by visions of Sirius trapped in the Department of Mysteries, he ignored Hermione's pleas to consult Dumbledore. The result was a catastrophe that cost Sirius his life. That lesson should have taught him the cost of secrecy, yet when the Elder Wand's shadow loomed, Harry repeated the same pattern. "I don't want to be anyone's hero," he once told Scrimgeour, resisting the pressure to serve as a symbol. Yet in that resistance, Harry often turned inward, refusing to share even with those who stood beside him. His courage was unquestionable, but his solitude carried consequences. The irony is that Hermione herself uncovered the tale of the Hallows. She read the tale of the 3 brothers aloud, her rational mind dismissing it as fairy tale, while Xenophilius swore by its reality. In that moment, Harry could have bridged the gap. He could have admitted that he had seen signs, that he suspected Dumbledore's wand was no ordinary relic, that Voldemort's obsession was not idle, but directed toward this very prize. But instead, Harry let the conversation drift, overwhelmed by the greater urgency of the Horcrux hunt. He convinced himself that Horcruxes were all that mattered, while Voldemort worked to secure both immortality and invincibility. It is telling that Harry's first true comprehension of Voldemort's success came not from foresight, but from a vision forced upon him. The connection between their minds showed him the moment Voldemort split open Dumbledore's tomb, the moment he took possession of the wand. Voldemort had the Elder Wand. The realization burned with dread, and Harry could not stop the sickening twist in his chest. It was then, and only then, that he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had ignored. He had failed to speak, when speaking might have changed the tide. Harry's reluctance to involve others was not cowardice, but a deep mistrust of burdening his friends with what he considered his duty. Dumbledore had given the mission to him, Ron, and Hermione: destroy Horcruxes. Harry saw any distraction as betrayal of that mission. Yet this rigid sense of responsibility blinded him to a simple truth. Leadership does not mean silence. True leaders do not hoard fears. They share them, drawing strength from the wisdom and courage of others. Harry, still a boy in so many ways, had not yet learned that lesson. And so he faced the Elder Wand's rising power without a plan, without allies prepared to counter it. The tragedy of that silence is sharpened when one considers how differently events might have unfolded. If the Order had known that Voldemort sought Dumbledore's wand, they could have guarded the tomb. If McGonagall and the teachers at Hogwarts had been warned, perhaps they would have devised protections. If Ollivander, once rescued from Malfoy Manor, had been asked not only about wand law in general but about this specific wand, he might have explained that allegiance did not transfer by theft alone. Each of these paths could have shifted the balance, but Harry never opened the door to them. Instead, Harry carried the revelation alone, wrestling with it in silence, while Voldemort unleashed terror with renewed strength. The duel in the Great Hall would later hinge on this very misunderstanding. Voldemort, holding the Elder Wand, believed himself invincible. Harry, who finally pieced together the chain of allegiance, from Draco to himself, realized that Voldemort's triumph was hollow. "Doesn't work that way," Harry told him at the last, revealing that the wand was never truly Voldemort's. That insight saved him, but the risk he had run was catastrophic. The entire wizarding world balanced on the edge of destruction because Harry had failed to speak sooner. In literary terms, this silence is part of Harry's tragic flaw. Like many heroes, he struggles not against external enemies alone, but against his own temperament. His bravery often shades into recklessness, his loyalty into isolation, his focus into narrowness. The Elder Wand episode crystallizes this flaw. He had knowledge, scattered, incomplete, but urgent. He had allies who would have listened, yet he chose to say nothing, trusting that destiny or sheer courage would suffice. Only the peculiar twist of wand law saved him from disaster, not foresight or planning. The moral resonates strongly. Silence in the face of looming danger can be as destructive as betrayal. Harry was not malicious nor indifferent, but his choice to conceal rather than confide nearly doomed his world. "I'll do it alone," he often thought. But no war is won alone. The Elder Wand in Voldemort's hand is the symbol of what happens when even the bravest hero refuses to ask for help. What makes this failure compelling is that it is so human. Readers may admire Harry for his courage, yet they also recognize in him the flaws of pride, fear, and secrecy. Everyone has moments when they should speak but remain silent, when they should seek help but believe it weakness. Harry's silence over the Elder Wand is one such moment, magnified by the scale of the war. That he ultimately triumphed does not erase the lesson. Had he chosen otherwise, countless lives might have been spared the shadow of Voldemort's final rampage. And so the story of the Elder Wand is not only about wand lore or destiny, it is about the choices of a boy thrust into leadership, who learned, too late, that trust and openness are as essential as courage. The silence he kept after Dumbledore's death nearly cost everything. The victory at Hogwarts, where Voldemort's killing curse rebounded for the last time, was not a triumph of secrecy, but of truth revealed at the very last moment. Harry's burden was never meant to be his alone, and the Elder Wand stands as the sharpest reminder of the cost of silence. Number 26. The bounty on his head. Harry's face was no longer just known in the wizarding world for being the boy who lived. By the time of the Deathly Hallows, it had become a wanted poster, plastered across walls, whispered in pubs, and carried by the shadows of both fear and greed. The Ministry, controlled by Voldemort's Death Eaters, declared him undesirable number 1, attaching a bounty so large it tempted even the desperate and the loyal. The posters screamed in block letters, "Undesirable number 1," with Harry's defiant face glaring out at anyone who looked. He had become less a person and more a prize. Yet in that moment of extreme danger, Harry chose secrecy, silence, and stubborn independence rather than leaning on those who could have shielded him. It was the kind of decision that illuminated both his courage and his flaws. The world around Harry was collapsing into suspicion and betrayal. The Ministry had become a hunting ground where even a casual glance could brand someone guilty of aiding him. Old friends and allies were being watched, their homes monitored, their conversations intercepted. It is understandable that Harry felt he could trust no one, but in his refusal to confide fully in the Order of the Phoenix, in Lupin, in McGonagall, or even in those willing to fight and die at his side, he left himself and his friends exposed. The reward for his capture hung in the minds of many, creating paranoia and feeding the kind of desperation that led directly to moments like the Snatcher's ambush in the forest. One wonders, had he sought broader help? Had he trusted more openly? Could those traps have been avoided? Harry's silence was not a matter of laziness, but a consequence of his character. He had carried burdens alone since childhood, and the pattern repeated here with terrible consequences. "The Ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming," was the chilling message delivered on Bill and Fleur's wedding day. Even then, Harry's instinct was not to retreat into the network of allies Dumbledore had left him, but to vanish with Hermione and Ron, guided only by scraps of clues. His wanted posters soon followed. He was an outlaw, but an outlaw who avoided the very organization created to defend him. The irony is striking. The Order of the Phoenix existed to resist Voldemort, yet its most important member often shut them out. The bounty created a theatre of betrayal. The forest scenes illustrate this most brutally when the Snatchers, led by Fenrir Greyback, cornered Harry and his friends. It was not just Voldemort's magic, but the lure of money and recognition that drove them. "We've got Potter!" shouted Scabia, drunk on the thought of reward. The promise of gold and favour turned ragged men into predators. Had Harry coordinated with the Order more closely, had he been able to anticipate such dangers with the help of seasoned fighters, perhaps he and his friends would not have been dragged to Malfoy Manor in chains. That chain of events, beginning with secrecy and ending with torture, highlights the weight of his decision to act alone. The reward for Harry was not only financial, it was symbolic. Capturing him meant prestige, safety, and perhaps exemption from Voldemort's cruelty. For ordinary witches and wizards crushed under the new regime, turning him in was a survival tactic. This was the atmosphere Harry walked through every day, invisible under his invisibility cloak, yet always visible in the minds of those who had seen the posters. The fact that he still insisted on moving without wider assistance shows the deep stubbornness bred in him by years of being the chosen one. He did not want to endanger others, but in refusing to involve them, he left them unprepared, scattered, and vulnerable. The Order of the Phoenix itself became fractured under the weight of half-truths. Members like Mundungus Fletcher, already unreliable, grew weaker when not anchored by a central mission. Lupin, consumed by guilt and self-doubt, offered his own companionship to Harry, only to be rejected in a heated exchange. McGonagall remained distant, fighting her own battles within Hogwarts. Kingsley Shacklebolt worked from the shadows, infiltrating the Ministry. Each of them had strengths Harry could have relied upon, but he chose instead to wander without revealing his true quest. His secrecy about the Horcruxes, while rooted in Dumbledore's instructions, made his allies feel sidelined and created unnecessary distance at the moment when unity was most critical. The posters haunted him even when unseen. Travelling through the countryside, moving from one hidden place to another, Harry knew that any stranger's glance could turn into suspicion. In the cafe encounter in Tottenham Court Road, 2 undercover Death Eaters recognized him almost immediately, even though he had taken precautions. "It's him! It's Potter!" one of them hissed, before spells flew across the tables. That moment underscores the futility of secrecy when one's face is already burned into every mind. A stronger network of coordinated support, rather than 3 young fugitives stumbling through England, might have lessened the constant risk of exposure. Yet Harry clung to isolation as though it were the only path to survival. His refusal to share the truth was not without emotional consequences. Ron, already stressed by the endless camping, resented being left in the dark. Hermione, though loyal beyond reason, felt the crushing pressure of guiding both boys without adult advice. These fractures came to a breaking point when Ron abandoned them temporarily, lashing out about the hopelessness of their wandering. The reward poster was a constant reminder of their hunted status, yet Harry's silence about the bigger plan only deepened the tension. If Harry had chosen to ask for broader help, to rally those who loved him, Ron's anger might have been tempered by the knowledge of the greater purpose. There is a chilling symbolism in the way the wanted posters dehumanized Harry. He was reduced to a headline, a price, a commodity. Undesirable number 1 erased the boy behind the name. And in his isolation, Harry almost began to live up to that image, an undesirable presence, moving from place to place, doubting the loyalty of all. The Ministry's campaigns succeeded not only in making him a fugitive, but in convincing him to retreat from trust. His refusal to lean on others was in some sense exactly what Voldemort desired, a chosen one who would stand alone, cut off from allies, easier to destroy. Still, the turning point comes when help does arrive, not because Harry asked, but because allies refused to abandon him. At Malfoy Manor, when he and his friends were captured, it was Dobby's intervention that saved them. The house elf, unasked, unlooked for, appeared in defiance of Voldemort's forces. Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts. Harry Potter must not be caught. Dobby's loyalty, pure and freely given, highlights the tragedy of Harry's refusal to ask for human help. The smallest ally, overlooked by many, gave his life to rescue Harry when an entire network of skilled fighters had been left idle, uncertain, and uninformed. The poster offering a reward also had a psychological effect on Harry himself. It reinforced his sense of being a target, a symbol rather than a person. This feeling led him to avoid even those he might have confided in, because he believed his presence endangered them. He imagined the ministry swooping in, arresting whole households, destroying families simply because he knocked on their door. This fear was not unfounded. Witness the fates of the Lovegoods and the Weasleys. Yet in choosing silence, he underestimated the courage of his friends and allies who were willing to share that risk. By denying them the chance, he bore all the weight alone, fracturing the unity that had once defined the resistance. One can trace this choice back to his earliest lessons from Dumbledore. Harry was told repeatedly that he alone must face Voldemort, that the prophecy named him uniquely. That instruction solidified into a mindset where every decision was filtered through the lens of solitary responsibility. Yet even Dumbledore, who preached secrecy, relied constantly on others, on Snape for information, on the Order for protection, on Fawkes for rescue. Harry failed to recognize that distinction. The bounty on his head demanded a communal response, but he turned it into a personal exile.